Okay, so the final exam is going to be similar to your RSP, just a much smaller version. So over here on the menu under final exam, you'll have your instructions and then you have the rubric. So I recommend that you take a few minutes and read through the instructions just to kind of get the scope of what you're going to be doing. And the instructions, let's see. Well, let's try this again. Well, what happened here? Of course, wouldn't you know it? Let's try doing this. Okay, so the instructions just kind of walk you through everything that's expected, but so I'll just highlight a few things. I'm not going to read the thing to you. I know that you all can read. So I'm calling it kind of a mini research study proposal. So it's testing your knowledge of the processes that we've done in the full version. The only page or section that has a specific page requirement is literature review. It just needs to be one full page. And that literature review, the research you do can all come from your textbook. So you don't have to go out and do a bunch of research or do any new researching. You can do that all from your textbook. But the lit review needs to be at least a full page. The other sections, I give a nice, broad, vague heading here of needs to be significant or sufficient length and detail to show that you understand what you're doing. Okay, and so that is something to keep in mind. Go through the grading rubric, see the various sections so that you know what's required before you start. And then I want to make sure it's clear, don't just copy your RSP from class. You can use it as a model or as a place to get ideas, but I already know what your RSP is about. So if you show up for your exam with another very similar looking study just like it, okay, it's gonna kind of know. So by all means, use what you've learned there, but needs to be a separate idea and separate setting and participants and all that. The exam requires a little bit of research from your textbook. You can use outside sources if you want to, but they're not necessarily required. And I just put in a disclaimer here that I'll just be running your exams through a plagiarism checker just to make sure everybody has accountability on that. So just be aware of that. So I provide for you the primary instrument that you'll be using. So you don't have to find an instrument. So a lot of the work you've done for the RSP is kind of done for you to start you off on the right foot for your exam. Okay. This is an individual exam, not a group project. However, I do put in here that you can read each other's papers. You can ask another student in the class to read it, give you some suggestions, offer feedback. That's fine. Once you're all done, and then you can make changes based on peer feedback. I don't mind you doing that. And then of course I'm available and willing to answer questions as needed. So it's not a group project, but I don't mind you asking each other and other classmates for some input or for some criticism or proofreading, that kind of thing. Okay. It's due Wednesday, the 6th, 11:55 p.m. Then you'll submit that through the coursework page. It'll be an individual submission for everybody. So make sure it's in Word format. So I'm giving you the topic. The topic is teacher self-efficacy and student teachers. So the scenario is that you are basically Mr. Lazelle. You're the director of student teaching at a Christian university, an unnamed Christian university, right? And your job is to try to evaluate your teacher education program to see if it's developing good educators. And so you want to see if your student teachers have good teacher self-efficacy. So you're only proposing the details of the study. You're not creating data or conducting any analysis. So you don't need to you're not going to do a correlation. You're not going to even fabricate data. You're really just doing chapters 1, 2, and 3. So you don't have to do statistical analysis. You don't have to do any, you don't have to do, here's my data. Although the more you have, the better you show your understanding. So if you feel up to it, and if you want to go the extra mile, put that in there, that shows that you know what you're doing. But it's not necessarily required. The instrument you're going to use is the Teacher Sense of Efficacy Scale, and I put a link to it right in here. And so this is an instrument, actually, we talked about, I think it was the last week that we had class together. I remember mentioning it in a video, so maybe it was right after we dismissed for the semester. But it's the Teacher Sense of Efficacy Scale. Wolfik is one of the authors on this instrument. So I remember pointing that out, that Anita Wolfik is actually one of the instrument authors. This has a long form, and this has 24 questions. And then there's a short form that has only 12. You can use one or the other. You're not going to use both. Use one or the other in your study. Okay, so that's the instrument you're going to use. So when you are talking about your instrument, you will have to do some research on that instrument to show that it's been used. But that instrument is used so broadly, you won't have any trouble finding information on it. So it's a very, very used instrument. Now, one thing I will point out, especially to you guys, because you did a correlational study, if you intend to do that in your exam, you're going to need to come up with a second instrument. It doesn't have to be a instrument like the teacher self-efficacy. It could be grades. It could be an achievement test. It could be something else, but you need, for a correlation where you have to have two variables to run together, right? So you would need some other measurement. So if you choose to do correlation, which you probably would, because that's what you're familiar with from your project, just be aware you need to think of another variable and how you would measure that to be able to correlate it with the results from the TSES. Okay? So if you want to, find another instrument and write about it and talk about it, great. If you want to use, a lot of people would use like GPA or an achievement test scores or, a science test or something like that. I'll give you a little bit of freedom on that second instrument because I don't want you to have to spend a lot of time trying to seek one out. But just think about that if you're going to do a correlational study. I'll go over the rubric real quick, but do you have any questions on the general instructions here before we move on?
No, that seems very reasonable.
Okay. I did move the due date to Wednesday night. I think originally it said Tuesday night, but it is Wednesday night. Doesn't mean to push it off. It just means to give you as much time as we can there. Okay, let me talk about the rubric. Real quick. And you'll recognize this. It looks a lot like your rubric from the RSP, but it's a very much condensed version. So it has many of the same criteria. You need to have an APA title page. The abstract is nice and short, 50 words. Need several things in your abstract. Your introduction. You need a purpose statement. You don't have to come up with a problem statement. You're just coming up with a purpose statement. So remember, the purpose statement really tells what you're planning to do, right? That's what that is described in that section. So you're coming up with a purpose statement. You need a research question and null hypothesis. That's all you need for section 1. Section 2 is your literature review. And I mentioned again here, you can use textbook and class lectures for that section. And I will point out in this section, we want to make sure you're paraphrasing, not just pulling quotes from the textbook. Okay, make sure you're paraphrasing. And use educational psychology terminology as much as you can. So use terms from the textbook, show that you know what you're talking about when it comes to ed psych, and then talk about a theory and theorist. So whatever theory you choose, pull content from your text and talk about it, and make sure you have theory and theorist in there. Okay. And I'll put in there, it needs to be at least a page. Now that is a APA double-spaced page. So that's basically like 4 sentences, right? It's actually not that long. So I originally had it as 2 pages, and then my my little pea picking heart felt bad for you guys. And I thought, no, let's just do 1 page. So there you go. So consider that my graduation gift. All right. So are any of you three graduating? Not quite graduating yet. Okay. I can't remember
I
who
still
seen-
appreciate the early gift though.
Yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome. So just remember this a year from now, okay? When you graduate. Section 3, participants and setting. Just be real descriptive here again. Give lots of detail, and remember you're making all this up, but it does need to be realistic information. Okay, so describe your setting, your sample, as much detail as you can come up with, and knowing, of course, we know that it's not real. Instrumentation. So this is where you'll talk about the TSES. You'll describe the questions, the number of them, talk about the scoring, and you need to identify at least one other study, one other recent study. So this is where you will spend a little bit of time on that instrument and researching that a little bit to find at least one other study that has used it. Okay. Procedures, again, several of the steps from your full project. In your design and data analysis, you are talking about your design and what data analysis you will use, knowing that you're not actually going to do that in this exam. But you'll talk about the software, the applications, websites, what would you be using to actually go forward and do that. Your plans for some of the graphs and things like we've talked about in class. You'll talk about using those and why those are needed, but you don't actually have to include them. Okay, and then a reference page, basically you'll have the textbook on your references page, and then any, like this other, on your instrumentation, this other study that you talk about, that would need to be cited in your references page. So your references page would probably have, 2, 3, 4 references at most. Okay, so that is the final exam. Pretty straightforward, I think. Any questions on that?
No, I think that makes sense.
Okay. So I think it will be it'll take you some time. It's going to be, it's going to be a good challenge, but I don't think it's so overwhelming that I hope it's not so overwhelming that you feel like you can't be successful and you can't do it. It will take you some time. That's why it's open now. You can start on it as soon as you're ready. And you do have until Wednesday the 6th. So you've got, more than a week to work on it. But I think it's pretty good length. So if you have questions on it as you're working through it, feel free to email me. I'll be glad to help you, and I'll set you loose on that. Okay. So that is it. Any questions? I'll let you guys get back to your feverish work on your RSP, and it's looking pretty good. So I'm looking forward to seeing the final version. As you are, I'm sure. You're probably ready to be done with it, I'm sure. So, but I don't know right now if any of you plan to go to grad school, although that is probably something that's at least maybe on your radar, thinking about it. That kind of project when you get to grad school, you'll look back on this project and be like, oh, that's what we were talking about. I mean, it'll click, a lot of it'll click, and you'll be glad you did it. So I won't say you'll thank me later, but I will say that you get to that point, you will appreciate it, I think. So, okay, any questions? All right, thanks for joining tonight. I hope you have a good evening. I look forward to seeing your paper. Let me know if you have questions in the meantime, okay?